Sometimes you do the best you can with the money you have, and most likely everything will be fine. Doing a bulk of your meals, instead of centering them around maybe a more expensive cut of meat, doing a smaller amount of meat and doing a lot of whole grains and sourdough, inexpensive protein sources. How could I get those macronutrients in for less money? Cooking a whole chicken as opposed to buying chicken breasts. What am I buying that is organic and healthy but isn't really filling us up? Pre-made chips or granola. Taking each thing and thinking, is there a cheaper protein source? Is there a cheaper carb source here? Is there a swap I can make? My name is Lisa, mother of 8 and creator of the blog and YouTube channel Farmhouse on Boone. On this podcast, I like to talk about simplifying your life so you can live out your priorities. I help you learn how to cook from scratch and decorate on a budget through this podcast and my courses, Simple Sourdough and the Simple Sewing series. I also help people reach their goals from home through my business course, YouTube Success Academy. I will leave links to these resources in the show notes and description box below. Now let's get into the show. Welcome back to the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. We're going to do a solo episode today. I have a lot of things to chat about. Now, most of my inspiration for this comes from the Q&A form that you all can fill out. I will leave a link down in the show notes or the description box, depending on if you are listening to this on one of your favorite podcast players, or if you are watching this recording on YouTube, for you to be able to submit your questions. I know a lot of you aren't on social media, and this gives you an opportunity to weigh into the podcast and give whatever questions you want to hear about or guest suggestions. I really appreciate those as we're planning out the rest of 2025 and who's going to come on and the topics that we'll discuss. I love the listener feedback. The first thing before diving into some of the questions, I want to give you a little update on the build process. So as many of you know, if you've been following along a while, like our story in a nutshell, 6 years ago, we moved to a little homestead on 7 acres with an old house, an old barn. And a few years ago, we started getting the idea that we wanted a bit more acreage. We wanted to be a little further out of town, out of an HOA. So I didn't really talk about that a ton throughout the years that we lived at our last property, but we did have a fairly restrictive HOA. So we wanted a place just a bit further out into the country, a bit more freedom, and basically we could be able to build out whatever we want for our family and where we will likely live, barring any weird circumstances, forever, most likely. It's probably the farm that our grandchildren will come to, and we really wanted to set that into motion. So long story short, we are currently in an in-between house while working on our build. We sold our last homestead. That all went through back in December. And we're happy with how all that went. It was actually a pretty simple, straightforward process. I think we found the perfect buyers for our home. Seems like a couple that's really going to enjoy it for a really long time, a young family. But we really hoped we'd be a little further along in the build process by now. We were supposed to break ground back in November, but there are a few things that held that up. And then by the time we actually were able to do that, the weather this year, I know for many of you across the country, it's been a rough winter. I think some people who are in like completely different climates on the coast and like the Northwest and all that might not have experienced a different winter this year, but anybody in like the general middle of the country likely experienced what we did, which was a much harder winter than we've had the last several years. So we'd hoped that we could sometime during the winter pour our foundation and get started on the framing, but there were not any weeks that allowed for that. Thankfully, there are some coming up. So currently the foundation is dug and it's all the forms are there. We're just waiting to actually pour the concrete. I think things will move pretty quickly once that happens. We've been really busy working on the design behind the scenes. So even though there's not technically much there yet, we've been working on the design for the house. I'm already working on ordering the windows, the cabinets, the kitchen design, working on the exterior design. So where the garden will go. I haven't shared this much just because I don't know if it feels applicable for a lot of the content I share, but we also want a pool on our farm, Now, whether that can happen this year or next year, is possibly unrealistic. I don't know, to think that we could get something like that accomplished already, especially with the house not built yet. But we really had a vision for this property, this farm, to be one where we could host a ton. As our kids get older, we're about to have at some point 8 teenagers. We currently have 2 teenagers, obviously not all the same time, but we are having children grow up. They'll eventually be moving out of our house. We are thinking about all of the people that will come in our lives through all of that. So their friends, their spouses, their kids, all the friends that they have right now. We really want to be the house that people come to. I love to host. And I started realizing all the random places I've been in my life because that person had a pool. So like I've been to someone from my homeschool co-op's mother-in-law's house. I've been to a friend's mom's house. I've been to somebody I met through homeschool's neighbor's house, all because they had a pool. And it got me thinking that is something that brings people together throughout the summer months. In Missouri, we might be looking at 4 or 5 months out of the year, but it really is something that I have become more and more convinced. I thought for a while, well, back in my early motherhood years, I was like, no water of any kind. That's scary. And I still have a healthy caution for that. But as my older kids get older, there becomes this time where it's like you have to balance out like things that they can do and then also how to protect your younger ones. So we're going to put all the safety measures in place and all of that. But my friend Sarah from our tribe of many first kind of planted this idea in my head back when we met up at our first YouTube thing that we met up at. She was saying that the best thing that they ever bought was a pool. She has 11 kids and was basically saying that it's the house that all the friends come to. They host things. Just everybody flocks to their house because it's the fun house with the pool. That got me thinking. But at that time, I think this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. My older kids weren't as old. I had a lot of non-swimmers. I'm now at the point we have 6 swimmers, 2 who can't swim, but that eventually will. And Sarah encouraged me that when you have a pool, kids learn to swim a lot younger just from exposure to the water. And I've had lots of other friends say the same thing. Like, yeah, they can swim at 2 or 3 when you put them in the water every day. So anyways, we probably will be doing some kind of pool. And so we're thinking through like where that should go. Should it be further from the house so that maybe I'm less nervous about it, closer to the house so I can see it better? We're weighing all of that out. That's something that we are behind the scenes planning. One pool that I've been very inspired by for many years, I just think it's beautiful and simple, is Liz Marie from Liz Marie blog or Liz Marie Galvin over on Instagram. It's just a vinyl liner pool, but it has a tanning ledge or a sun ledge where she has some like lawn chairs. That's not really the right word for them, but lounging chairs in there. And it's just a basic rectangular shape with a concrete deck around it. And it's beautiful. And it kind of inspired me because I sometimes think of pools as you want them because they're really fun. And I probably would take one regardless of how beautiful it was because of how fun I know my kids will have with it, but not really thinking it could also add to the beauty and charm of a property that I want to look historic. It's a pool. It's something new. It's not like a beautiful pond or something like that. But hers actually looks really beautiful. And I started looking at different images on Pinterest. And I realized that what I like is just a simple rectangular shape, not a whole lot of slides and diving boards. And I'm pretty convinced that we want a pool. One thing that was suggested to me, and I remember being very excited about this years ago when I watched Danelle from Weedem and Reap put in a swimming pond, which was very beautiful because it looks very natural, like a real pond, but she put in different plants and things, and I need to look more into it. But basically it had a natural ecosystem that kept the water pure. The reason that we opted that we aren't going to do that is mostly for the safety reason of it. A basic rectangular pool can have covers installed that something very heavy could actually walk on. So I really want that to be installed. And I also want to put a nice fence around the pool. And with a pond, I feel like that would kind of lose the charm of that. It's natural. It was just there in nature. Yet there's a cover on it and a fence around it. So I decided we'd just embrace it and do like a rectangular pool. I think it's going to be beautiful. And even if it isn't, I really want to host. I'm 40 this year. We're just in a different season of life, and I'm ready to host all the things and be the house where people come. Recently, my sisters and I got a pretty quick random idea because we saw really cheap flights down to the Fort Lauderdale airport on Spirit Airlines. It was like $70 round trip to head down there for 4 days just to be warm. And so we did that in February, and we stayed at an Airbnb that we all split. Wasn't even that huge, but it totally worked out. One of my sisters and I brought several of our kids, but not the little two, just to make it really easy. I brought my 6 swimmers and left home my 2 non-swimmers. And it is amazing to me how that many children do not get sick of swimming in a pool. We just hung out at this house and they swam from morning until late at night. There was hardly a time where there wasn't someone in the pool. And that further confirmed to me that this would be a really fun thing. So we're meeting with a pool guy this weekend to see if we could start working on where that would go, because it's kind of tricky not having all of the pieces in place of our homestead and trying to figure out what has to come first so that it can all integrate together. And I think at some point we just have to pick locations for things and then eventually start filling in the spaces after that, because yeah, it can be a little bit overwhelming, but mostly just very, very excited. Mostly excited that the weather's going to not be so cold soon. And even if the pool's not in, we have a creek on our property and start enjoying some more of that outside fun. It's been a very, very cold one. So there's just a little update on the build and some of the plans. There's a lot of design going into it right now, but not a whole lot on the ground. Once this episode comes out, I do think that we're going to have our foundation poured, and maybe that means we're going to be moving into framing. I think at some point things will move really quickly. I do plan to share on my main YouTube channel, Farmhouse on Boone, the whole plans and design specifically of the house. And so stay tuned for that. When Luke and I were first married 17 years ago, we were on a super tight budget, and the only way that I could decorate my home and make it my own cozy space was by doing a lot of DIY and sewing. I've shared that for years on my YouTube channel, on this podcast, on my blog, and recently I put all of those resources together, all of the patterns, the tutorials, and then step-by-step instructions from getting a machine and threading it, learning about tension issues and the bobbin, all those things maybe over the years that have scared you away from sewing, into one course that I've called the Simple Sewing Series. If you've wanted to sew but have been intimidated by the process of getting started, or even if you're a more seasoned seamstress or sewist and you want to improve your skills, I really think that this will be a great resource for you. There's also a private community associated with it, so if you have sewing questions or you're excited to meet other people who are also getting started on their sewing journey, that's available with the course as well, and it's for a very affordable price. You can find my new course and all of the resources that go along with it over at bit.ly/simple sewing course. That's bit.ly/simple sewing course, all lowercase. That's where you can find more info and become a student. Let's jump into some of the questions. Okay, this is a fun one since I just talked about my sisters and I. Hi, Lisa. I want to have a closer relationship with my sister. We live an hour away from each other and have families of our own. How do you stay in close contact with your sisters and manage your households? Do you regularly get together, talk, or text on phones? Any tips would be appreciated. So it has been different based on what season of life we are in. So when we were first married and had a couple kids, so I actually got married 4 years before her. By the time she got married, I had 2 little kids. And then I ended up having my third about 6 weeks after she had her first. So the early parts of our marriage did overlap quite a bit. And we would spend so much time on the phone. I remember when she was first married and I had a couple little children, we would just put the phone to our ear and just go about all of our morning stuff for hours. I don't even know if we necessarily even talked the whole time. We didn't even live that far apart from each other at that time, but we just talked about anything and everything, and we repeated and rehashed out like all the same things every single day. Now, as our kids got older and there were more of them, you can't really get away with that. Like when there's just toddlers at your feet, you just have to kind of watch them and make sure they're not getting into anything. You can talk on the phone. You can, what do people do these days? Marco Polo. You can't really do that when there's a lot of children in a small space. It would just be chaotic. Plus, there's lots of things you need to do. Like you need to interact with those children a lot more than just the occasional, like, oh, aren't you so sweet kind of thing. Like you actually have conversations with them. So we don't do that anymore. But we do have regular times that we get together every single week. And the days where we don't, so usually the way this works out for us is we usually see each other. And I'm speaking, I have 3 sisters right now. So I'm talking about my sister that's just 2 years younger than me because my younger sisters were so much younger. They were living at home during that early phase of our marriage, but now they're all married and have children. And so now I'm speaking about all 3 of them. We have very regular times that we get together every single week. And the days that we don't have that, we really don't end up talking very much because we're so busy. We are so involved in all the things that we have to do to make it to where we can see each other on those other days. So for an example, today's Thursday, and tonight, 2 of my sisters and I, one of them can't make it to this, get together while our older kids are at Awana's and we have sushi. So that's something we do on Thursday nights. And then usually on Friday, we find some way to get together. It's been really tricky during the winter. Last couple Fridays ago, we were all 4 in Miami. But then the Friday before that, it was freezing. And since I can't currently really host people where I live right now, we crashed my mom's house. So we all 4 went there. We bundled up the big kids. They went outside and rode a side-by-side with our dad. My boys have dirt bikes. They did that. And then we kept a lot of little kids inside. Tomorrow we're getting together and we're all meeting in a gym. We found that there was a gym that we could come and hang out in because it's still really cold. When it gets a little bit warmer, we'll meet at a park. And then every other Friday I have homeschool co-op, but the Fridays that we can, we all will get together. Saturday is kind of random. We don't always have plans. During the farmers market months, we do all 4 go to the same farmers market and just let the kids run around. We shop. One of my sisters sells her beef and pork there. So she will stand in her booth. A lot of times my other sisters and I will kind of hang around her booth and maybe take the kids on a walk for a little while. Right now, that's not going on because it's still winter, but we do usually still in some capacity get together. I feel like this Saturday we might meet up at my parents' because they have a pond and it should be frozen. So we might ice skate. So Saturday is not a set thing, but we usually do end up doing something. And then on Sundays, we all go to my parents for lunch and dinner and just hang out there. And we've been doing that for years. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, other than our family group text where we might send something funny our kids said or a picture, we really don't end up talking hardly at all. Like we send maybe texts like of things that are practical, like, hey, did you get this? Or should I bring this? But not really much communication during those days. Those days, we are very focused on getting our work done around the house, homeschool stuff, business stuff. And then usually by like Thursday night, we're starting to get together a little bit more. So that's kind of how we do it. We have had phases of life where we've lived an hour apart and we still have done that. So it just really depends, if you have somewhere you can meet halfway or if half the time she drives toward you or half the time you drive toward her. We don't really all of my family is kind of like this where a drive is not really enough to deter us if we want to do something fun. We're just like, oh, well, we'll just jump in the car and do it. We've all been this way. And I think the reason is mostly because we've lived in very rural areas a lot of our lives. And so there's just been very few things that have been convenient. And so when I talk to someone who lives more toward the city, they'll say something like, oh, well, that's 15 minutes away. Whereas for us, we might say it more like, well, that's only 45 minutes away, So it's really a perspective thing. Ideally, you'd live closer, if you could, but we've been in the situation where we haven't always too. But we've had like halfway points. So there was a town when we did live that far apart, halfway in between, where we just find all the amenities there. Like we meet at that town's parks, we meet at that town's pool. Our kids, the cousin relationship is also really important for us, more so now than ever, because we have children that are best friends. They miss each other. They want to see each other. And so it's motivated by, not only having a community to hang out in, but also just like the kids want to see each other. And so we have to find some intentional time to make that happen. I know not every family is like this, but it's the bright spots that I look forward to when I'm trying to like get all this stuff done and we're in our house grinding it out. I'm like, well, at least on Friday, we're going to go to that gym and we're going to get together and hang out and bring sandwiches. And yeah, we're all very extroverted though, as far as our personalities go. And so we have to have these regular times of getting together. Okay, on that same note, I had another question that said, hey, Lisa, I was wondering if you had to choose either having land or living close to family, what would you choose? We want land, but housing here in Utah is so expensive. 1 million plus for 5 acres. That's very expensive. If you knew the prices here, oh boy. So we're thinking of moving to Texas away from family so we can get land. If you had to choose, what would you choose? So I can say without a doubt, and this probably won't surprise you after my last answer, that I would definitely just stay where family is. Love having land. In fact, I don't even know. Like you'd have to find in Utah, and I don't know if this is possible, but just a real quick example. The house we live in right now in town is a lot harder with little kids and homesteading than the house that we lived in town, our first home on Boone Street. So the home where I named the blog Farmhouse on Boone, it was right on a busy street. It was only a 1/4 acre lot. So it didn't have a whole lot to offer. However, it bordered a public park. So it wasn't like there was houses all around like there is here. There's tons of houses. And we had a nice open green backyard where I did a huge garden. We had chickens. Now, of course, we couldn't do a dairy cow. We couldn't do dairy goats, but I definitely lived that homestead lifestyle, made bread from scratch, sewed my own clothes, all that kind of stuff on that property, even though it was just in a busy part of town and not super private and not on land. But during that time, at that public park, I met up with my sister, I met up with friends, and I don't think I would trade that. Now, it's hard having a ton of kids in a house in town, but I still think I would choose that. Yes, ideally, you would have grown up in Texas. Like I always think that, like, man, where would I be? If my family if we grew up somewhere else, obviously, maybe somewhere with nicer weather in the wintertime, that would be nice. But I wouldn't leave just for that, because family and getting together with family and having that sense of place and all of that is really important to me. It's become more important the older I get, and I just wouldn't trade it. I mean, I would look for, like I said, somewhere with a bit more privacy. Sometimes places are only a 1/4 acre, a 1/2 acre, but they're tucked at the end of a cul-de-sac, or they border land that isn't privately owned. And there's, opportunities like that. If at all possible, I try to find that, but I would totally stay. That's just me personally. But it also depends on how close you are with your family. For some people, they're not, getting together with their family all the time. And so it wouldn't change a whole lot about their living situation. But if you're close to your family, which I kind of imagine you are, if you are choosing between those two. So that's something to factor in. Now, if you asked 10 other homesteaders, self-sufficient type people, which I don't really consider myself that, I enjoy it I just find it lovely. I find it all very enjoyable, but we're not like growing our year's worth of produce. But if you talk to other people with that same desire, I don't know. 9 out of 10 might give you a different answer. I really don't know. So you can ask other people as well, but I'm just saying that's what I would choose. All right, taking a quick break from this episode to tell you about my course, Simple Sourdough. So I've been educating on sourdough since 2016 on my YouTube channel and on my blog. More recently, I took those years of resources, recipes, how-to instructions, and put them all into one course so that it's all compiled together. You can get it in one place and learn from the very basics. So if you are brand new and you want to learn how to do sourdough the simple way, or even if you want to improve your baking skills, you should check out my course, Simple Sourdough. It's all for a very affordable price. I wanted to get this information into kitchens all across the world. You can learn more and become a student at bit.ly/simple sourdough course. bit.ly/simple sourdough course, all one word, all lowercase. When you have a newborn, do you put them down for any of their daytime naps or do you wear them in the wrap for all their naps? So I totally wear the newborn for every single nap. I don't start transitioning to naps down till probably about 7 months or so. Hey, Lisa, you may have answered already in a previous episode, but I'm curious, when you mill your fresh grains, do you mill just enough for what you need for that recipe and or for the day, or do you ever mill enough to fill a canister and then use when needed? New to all this and ready to jump into freshly milled grains, but still have questions. So I try to only mill for what I am baking because, as you might remember, if you listen to the Sue Becker episode, she talked about the nutritional value that's lost within just hours, a day, 2 days of milling freshly whole grains. So it loses the benefits that you're trying to gain. So usually if I mill too much, I will right away roll that into making another recipe, or I'll just feed my sourdough starter a bunch and then I'll have fed sourdough starter for the next day to make pancakes or something. Because Sue Becker also did say that the nutritional breakdown ends when you either bake it or when you put it into something fermenting like sourdough or something. So you're stopping that process when you use them. And so I do try to use them all up. I don't make a separate canister. I used to do that more, but now that I know that there's really almost no benefit of the grains after they're sitting there, I would rather just reach for all purpose if I needed something in a quick pinch and mill as I go. So that's why I like having a mill that you can leave out on your counter at all times, something a little bit larger, like the ones with the bucket that's contained in the mill are a little large for most kitchen countertops. And so having one of the freestanding ones where you add the bowl instead of, there's a separate, you just would use a separate bowl to mill the grains into. I do find that those are a little bit more accessible for you just to leave out all the time and mill the grains as needed. Okay. Hi, I'm new to motherhood and homesteading. I have a 1-year-old boy so far. We're on a tight budget right now as my husband can't get a better paying job until he graduates college next year. We try to buy everything organic and we buy raw milk, meats from local farms, etc., etc. It seems like we're always spending more than $600 a month on groceries for our little family of 3. I'm not sure if this is normal or not. I make all our meals from scratch, especially sourdough breads. Could there be a podcast on practical tips for new moms for cutting down grocery spending when buying organic produce, raw milk, meats from local farms, etc.? Like, what can we do to save money each month on groceries when trying to prioritize our health? This would be a great episode, and trying to think of who I could have on to talk about something like that. I am having on Frugal Fit Mom. Write this down because this could be a good topic to discuss with her. But I'll share some of my quick thoughts. And just to be completely transparent, I don't really know if $600 a month is a lot or not because having 10 people in our family, I don't know how to compare that to having 3. However, there was a time when I had 3, but of course that was back in 08, 09. And so everything was way different. I think I paid $4 a gallon for raw milk at that time. So it's really hard to compare. And also there's other factors like where do you live? Because I know some people pay $25 a gallon for raw milk. I'm in a position right now where I pay around $7 a gallon for raw milk, which I know is very, very inexpensive compared to most areas in the country. So it really just depends on a lot of factors of if I could say that's a lot or that's not a lot. Right offhand, it doesn't seem like a whole lot, but on a very on a limited budget, I could see why you'd want to consider, is this normal? Am I on the right track? And there are definitely people who have content that focus more on like taking each line item and figuring out where you could cut down. So my quick initial thoughts are, and this isn't maybe necessarily always the best health concern, but sometimes you do the best you can with the money you have, and most likely everything will be fine. So I would say doing a bulk of your meals, instead of like centering them around maybe a more expensive cut of meat, doing a smaller amount of meat and doing a lot of whole grains and sourdough and inexpensive protein sources like, well, I was going to say eggs, but I don't think that's the case anymore. For a long time, to me, in my area, one of the cheapest ways to pack a lot of protein was just doing eggs. Like if you take the grams of protein, and if you're a math person, you could sit down sometime and figure this out. How many grams of protein per dollar are eggs versus, what I'm currently paying for ground beef or a roast where I'm doing shredded meat? And just thinking, how could I get those macronutrients in for less money? There's certain things to maybe cut all together. I mean, sadly, like bacon. Like I believe, did not run the math on this, but I'm pretty sure that's a higher amount of money per gram of protein than something like ground beef, cooking a whole chicken as opposed to buying chicken breast. I'd stay away from chicken breast, especially organic pasture raised chicken breasts. Those are really pricey. And if you can afford them in your budget and convenience is more of like, if time is more of your problem, then that balance changes and you start buying things like that, like chicken breast and different cuts of meat that might lend themselves more to convenience if budget is less of the problem and time is more of the problem. But you weigh those things out and figuring out what's my cheapest source of protein, what am I buying that is organic and healthy but isn't really filling us up, so it's just fun to eat but it's not actually keeping us alive and contributing to our health, like things like pre-made anything, like pre-made chips or granola. Just buying oatmeal, organic oatmeal is going to nourish your body so much more, and you're going to be spending a lot less per ounce. So kind of taking each thing and thinking, is there a cheaper protein source? Is there a cheaper carb source here? Is there a swap I can make where, I'm not buying anything pre-made? Of course, you're saying you make everything from scratch. So like this might just be what it costs. And maybe you could cut the budget in other areas. But those are just some of my quick thoughts on potential ways to cut the grocery budget. There are cheaper foods that are more filling. And so weighing the balance of like, maybe we're going to eat more of those filling cheap foods and less of the more expensive ones. We're going to add them in, for nutritional and whatnot. But like, sometimes I think we watch too, like I watch people on Instagram who are eating in a certain way and they're piling their plates with all of these things that are possibly very expensive that you could find a similar nutritional profile for by finding something local and fresh and closer to the source and not like putting blueberries on every plate. This is just a really small example. But, I think there could be some wiggle room there. But it also could just be that groceries are really expensive, and I know that they are. Okay, another baby sleep question. We've co-slept till about 14 months. My toddler is still needing help during nap times to get through sleep cycles. How can I teach her to put herself back to sleep? She doesn't take a passy. It's getting old when she can't sleep for 2 hours straight on her own at 18 months. So this is the part where I'm going to tell you I'm completely unqualified. My 18-month-old also does not sleep 2 hours. And when he wakes up in the middle of a nap, there are some times where I'm like, I'm just going to give you a few minutes, but he almost never falls back asleep. I know some people's, like my sister's baby, she's 18 months. She does. She said, okay, if she wakes up, an hour in, don't get her because she'll cry for 5 minutes and then she'll go right back to sleep for another hour. So she's learned that about her baby, but she does take a passy. I forgot that part. And mine doesn't. So that could be the reason they're not easily self-soothing. Now, because my 18-month-old doesn't take long naps, we are still doing 2 naps. So that way he is getting his sleep. It just isn't all at one time. Usually around age 2, I find they grow out of that. And sometime around age 2, almost all of my kids take that solid 2-hour nap, but it's a little bit dicey younger than that. So I guess I just don't know. I don't know, but I know at some point all of my kids go through that like 2-hour nap phase, and it's usually not at 18 months. How do you modify your cooking for your family when baby's old enough to start baby-led weaning? For example, do you stop adding salt if you know baby will be eating the food? Is there anything else you consider? If you do modify for cooking, at what age do you stop worrying about these things? So I don't worry about those things at all. When my babies start picking up a little bit of food from, whatever we're eating, usually around 7 months, that's just small amounts. They start eating a little bit more, as they get closer to 1, that they start adding more and more. And then I'd say by 1, they're eating quite a bit. That varies from kid to kid. One of my sister's kids doesn't eat. They just do not do that at all till they're closer to 1. They all just gag. They have no interest. My kids do get interested in picking up little bits of food somewhere around 7 months usually. And I don't modify anything. So I cook as I usually would. I give them the things that I'm more confident that they won't choke on. So that's one thing I wouldn't give them, something I think they're going to choke on. But anything that they could pick up and eat, I don't worry about. Salt, butter, nothing. I don't worry about any of it. I will say there have been kids where I worried more about the honey thing. I guess I still worry about the honey thing. And that's not controversial. That's a questionable thing because I've read so many moms that give their kids, honey from a very young age, 6 months, 9 months. I still don't. It's one of those things that I still worry about. Maybe I just am uneducated on it. There's, the botulism risk with honey. I've definitely gotten more laid back about it because there's been times like with previous kids where I was like, oh no, that had honey. And I get so worried. And now I'm like, I know they're going to be fine. Like if they ate a piece of pancake. So that's like the one thing I do change is until they're 1, if say I make pancakes and I usually throw honey in it, I'll just throw in some maple syrup instead, just because if you're going to be worried about it and it's going to keep you up at night for whatever reason, even if it's not true, even if it's one of those stupid things that we don't have to really worry about, it's easy enough to just throw in the maple syrup, and I'll do that because as soon as I don't do that, somebody else will give the baby some pancakes, not knowing that, I had honey in it. Again, I'm not near as worried as I used to be, but I'll make it with syrup instead. But other than that, like salt, I think that's all good. Okay. Homesteading with little kids and a husband with a full-time job. My family is moving onto our homestead in 1 month. Ooh, that's exciting. I can't wait to move back to a homestead, to be honest. I am not made for in town. We have an infant and a 1.5-year-old. We will just start with garden and chickens. My husband works all day, so as a stay-at-home mom, this will be mostly my responsibility. How do you get farm chores done with babies when you don't have an extra hand? I'm thinking of logistics like getting out to feed the chickens in the morning. I know your husband is home with you now and helps you, but before he quit his job, how are you able to keep animals with little babies to watch? So just things like strollers, containment, baby wearing. So for the infant, you could have the baby in a wrap. You could have the other one in like a jogging stroller strapped in so you can kind of go around your homestead and your yard with those big tires. Honestly, when I had 2 little kids, we didn't live on a homestead, but we definitely had a garden and chickens. And as long as you can contain them so they're not, running off to the pond or the road or whatever hazards, it's very manageable, especially things like chickens. Like chickens are really, really easy to care for. They require almost no effort. You can get a big waterer that hangs up that you only have to refill like once a week. Very, very simple to do. That's not going to be a problem at all. The garden would be a little bit more active work. And so you might want to get out, in the earlier morning so the babies aren't super hot or getting sunburned. But chickens won't be a concern. Now, it gets a little trickier when you have a dairy cow and you need to milk while caring for young ones. I've totally done it. There have been times when Luke and the older kids have been out of town and I have little kids and need to manage, doing the dairy cow and all the homestead stuff with the little ones. And that's totally my method is containment. Long as you have that, even if they're not happy, a lot of times they are. Like if you kind of turn the stroller towards the chickens, towards the gardening, and they're watching, they find that fun. And then if, if you can only work in small doses and then you need to go inside for a little while, That's the beauty of having really young kids is your days are really flexible because you don't really need to worry about school of any kind. There's really a wide open day when you have little kids, and then also they nap. So if you can get a baby monitor for the 1.5-year-old, put that in their room so you could head out to the garden while you have the 1-month-old in the wrap. You can cover a lot of ground that way. I mean, you could even save all of your chores for just nap time, and having, throughout the day, maybe it's a morning and an afternoon nap or something like that, 2 hours to work on, you won't even need that. You won't even need 30 minutes to deal with a garden and chickens. So it's totally, totally doable. All right. Well, my children have all decided that my work time is up. I will say I do have 15 minutes left, but it's getting a little loud, so I don't want to distract you with that. There are plenty more questions I will be answering on the next episode, and I hope that you will join me. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode of the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. Thanks, as always, for listening to the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. My husband Luke and I and our 8 kids work together side by side on our little homestead and use our blog, podcast, and YouTube channel to reach other homemakers, home cooks, and homesteaders with practical recipes in daily family life. For everyday sourdough recipes, make sure to check out our blog, farmhouseonboone.com. And to dig deeper, we do also offer a course called Simple Sourdough over at bit.ly/farmhouse sourdough course. That's all one word, bit.ly/farmhouse sourdough course. If you're looking to learn how we earn an income online, check out my YouTube course at bit.ly/farmhouse YouTube course, all one word.